Hey everyone.
Hi
Hello.
there, everyone.
Hey, sisters.
Hey. How y'all doing?
I'm here.
Doing all right.
That's all you had to do was show up.
This looks fancy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got a lot going on. We have a slide deck that someone is in control of, not me. But let's see. Give everyone a couple more minutes to get in. Since I missed the prep, is there anything else other than what we've emailed about that I need to know? Nope, we're here. We're gonna, I'll go over the agenda when we get started properly. Just gonna have a little conversation, shoot the breeze. What you see is what you get.
Nice.
Great. I clearly missed the memo on glasses and like doing anything with my hair, clearly.
Oh, my hair looks done?
Yeah.
That's what I was going for. It's not. It's really not. And I'm gonna change my shirt after this because
We got the shirts down, Tamika. Yeah.
We did. I had to go bold with something. Let me put some
Okay.
lotion on my elbows though.
I have
So I
some
think we got bold
unurbanist.
down. Yeah.
Oh, they can hear us? Cool.
Oh, sorry. I'm just kidding, y'all. I showered. Kind of. I have some unurbanist shirts to send you. To send both of you. I'll send you one too. I'll send everyone one.
Are they in the different colors? Was one of them yellow?
I got you the yellow one.
Ooh,
Yeah.
dope.
Got my little yellow mango drink right here. You know I love me some yellow. You know. How's the weather where you're at? So
It's hot. How's your weather?
it's hot. It's been real hot. Yeah. All the seniors are in the mall walking around because, you know, it's where they get the air conditioning.
Is the mall open?
Yeah, they've opened the malls out here.
I hope not. I wish they wouldn't.
I know. I mean, like, I don't know, in one way, because it's really hot out here, kind of makes sense. Especially for people that kind of need that space. Those third spaces, right? But anyways, I'm having like real smooth conversation right now. I'm forgetting that this is a whole.
I know.
Yeah, we are currently streaming. We are live to the audience that is accumulating.
Cool.
I'll kind of.
Hi everyone.
Everybody.
This is what it's like when you get together with your homies and you're just catching up.
Right.
What can we say?
That's right.
Yeah, so we're gonna let's give it just another minute. Everyone's like getting that like notification and rushing to get their headphones so they can log in and hear us talk about disruptive urban practices.
Okay, I thought we were here to talk about bike lanes.
Oh, honey.
Just kidding.
I've already planted several people with questions. Like, I know we have to open it and it's going to be fair, but I've specifically recruited a lot of cyclists and from our local community to tune in tonight. So if we don't get some bike questions, I will find some. All right, well, we're just gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Emme Mattaridi. I'm referred to by they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm a co-organizer with Strong Women, Strong Places. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this event tonight, a conversation on race and intersectionality. So SWSP is an organization based in Central Ohio, and we are aimed at advancing the role of gender in place-based work. And tonight we're going to be participating in an action-oriented discussion on what racism and injustice look like in urban planning and how we as planners can take an anti-racist approach for equitable solutions for long-lasting change. So we are happy to be hosting this incredible panel of guests who I will introduce shortly, but first I'm going to go over our agenda and a few housekeeping details. So I'm going to open our discussion with a few big idea questions, and we'll talk for probably 30 minutes on those points, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. And so that's where housekeeping is going to get iffy. If you are joining us in the Zoom platform, we have a chat which is getting very active with people from all over North America. I'm seeing Vancouver, Boston, Boulder, Colorado. You guys are coming in way too fast for me. So we have that available, and then we also have a Q&A box in the Zoom platform. So if you want to direct a question to myself and the panelists for the second part of this session, please put those questions there. And for anyone who's joining us on the Facebook live stream, there is also a chat function available there, and it is being moderated. So if you share any questions there, they will be elevated to us later in the evening. Thank everyone for getting in the chat. You beat me to it. I was going to ask you to share where you're from and what you're doing. So we're seeing a lot of locations. But if anyone wants to drop what you do, are you a student, a planner? What are you specializing in? As I go ahead and introduce myself and the panelists. So again, my name is Emme. I'm a master's student in city and regional planning at The Ohio State University, where I also received my bachelor's in GIS. I'm a really big transportation nerd. I'm an intern for the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. I work for transportation infrastructure and development, and I get to support all sorts of interesting mobility projects for Central Ohio. And we were already talking a little bit about bike planning. Most recently, I've been on a lot of bike projects for our local community. And so I highly encourage any participants that are into bikes. These are the people to be directing some questions to. So I'll let you guys get wild in the Q&A. But now on to our panelists, who I will briefly introduce. First, I'd like to introduce Tamika Butler. And Tamika, is it correct that you're referred to by she, her pronouns?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So Tamika has a diverse background in law, community organizing, and nonprofit leadership. They're the principal of Tamika L. Butler Consulting, where they focus on shining a light on inequality, inequity, and social justice. Tamika provides consulting, training, and public speaking for a wide range of organizations in the public and private sectors. Recently, she was the executive director of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, a nonprofit organization that pardon me, addresses social and racial equity. And before that, she was the executive director of the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition. Thank you for joining us tonight, Tamika.
Thanks for having me.
Next is Dr. Destiny Thomas. Dr. Destiny, are you referred to by she, her pronouns?
Yes, she,
Yes.
her.
Thank you. All right. Dr. Destiny Thomas is the founder and chief executive officer of Thrivance Group. She identifies as an anthropologist planner. She's from Oakland, California. She has a combined 6 years of experience working in project management capacity within government agencies. This includes roles that 3.5 years as Caltrans environmental planner, 2.5 years as a transportation planner for the city of LA. And in addition to this, Dr. Thomas has 7 years of experience leading key advancements in racial equity initiatives across the state by way of community organizing, policy writing, and nonprofit management. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And our final panelist today is Amina Yasin. Amina, are you referred to by she, her pronouns?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Amina is currently the Vancouver City Planning Commissioner and a board member of Hogan's Alley Society, which is the historically Black community in Vancouver's, I hope I pronounce this right, Strathcona neighborhood, that was eradicated and displaced from the city of Vancouver. She has also co-chaired the Canadian Institute of Planners Social Equity Committee. She currently works as an urban planner in Metro Vancouver within development and policy planning. She's given several keynote and panel presentations on the anti-Black history and present realities of urban and transportation planning among very many intersections, including urban development, active transportation, mental health. So thank you, Amina, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so thanks again to all our panelists for offering your time and wisdom to this conversation. It's my pleasure to be moderating tonight. And I'm So thrilled to see everyone in the chat coming from such an interesting variety of backgrounds tonight. So to begin our conversation, our panelists, we shared with you some resources about Columbus, Ohio that I want to communicate to other participants on this call tonight. Because Strong Women, Strong Places is a Columbus-based organization, and we have really been committed to bringing education and resources to our community, and so we want to introduce that tonight a little bit for context for some of this conversation. So Columbus and Central Ohio as a region is growing really rapidly. The metro area has just under 1 million residents, and the region as a whole is expected to grow to 3 million residents by 2050. So we have a lot going on. There's a lot of new development happening, a lot of new money coming in, a lot of growth. And it seems, you know, on the surface that there's a lot of success in Columbus, but this is really only a part of the reality of Columbus. In a study in 2015 out of the University of Toronto, Columbus ranks second in economic segregation among large US metro areas. And so this results in, you know, physical and cultural barriers that divide residents by wealth and status, which directly impact housing and health, education and quality of life. And as we continue to make investments and grow, you know, it's critical that our planning communities and our decision makers, you know, acknowledge the history that we're working with that has shaped our neighborhoods, you know, the very design and network of our cities. Which is, you know, evident in Columbus as, you know, Short North is an area that's gentrified significantly over the past 2 decades. Franklinton is an up and coming area, Old Town East. For people that are in Columbus, you know which neighborhoods I'm talking about. But sort of to launch into our first question right now, you know, we can speak on the history of urban planning as, you know, a racist legacy system. We can talk about redlining, we can talk about zoning, we can talk about public housing and how the systems were created to separate and punish Black American citizens. And I think in recent conversations, Tamika and Destiny, I know you both were on the Movement podcast recently, where you spent a little time talking about, you know, this history of racism in urban planning, and you guys had a brilliant discussion, but I also sensed a lot of, like, aren't we sick of this? Like, we can keep going over the history, we know the history, we know how that history is impacting the present day lived experiences. So my first question to you guys is, how do we sort of mobilize past, you know, rehashing this history and reevaluating and continuing to look at this history? How do we mobilize and sort of take that critical acknowledgement, but put power behind it and get this forward into, you know, some action? So whoever wants to start off, we're starting off kind of heavy hitting tonight.
Well, I can offer something to this question, and I think applies across the broader region, so we can include Canada in my recommendation for land use-based reparations packages. And I think that, you know, it is true that I'm quite exhausted about talking about, exhausted from talking about the legacy of racism without commitment from my colleagues to really resolve the harm that's pervasive and still ongoing as a result of that legacy. And I think that reparations, particularly in ways that show up in the built environment, is an excellent way to both acknowledge that past, but also attach the aspects of us culturally, spiritually, socially that are still so vibrant and ready to be accommodated in the built environment. And so I think that's a way we tie the two, not two eras, because it's not 2 points in time, it's actually still really present. But I think that's a way we kind of bring everyone up to speed and up to date and make a commitment about how we plan to move forward.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think if you haven't read Dr. Thomas's piece on reparations, you should definitely read it. I think most people who have read it who didn't have a hissy fit and freak out, but the folks who actually like took time to think about it felt like it was heavy and felt like it gave them a lot to think about. And I think there's this tension when you talk about this work. There's this tension because overcoming centuries of oppression and white supremacy is not going to be fast. It's not going to be easy. And I think sometimes, you know, when we as folks who do this work say, yo, you got to slow down, you got to listen to people, you got to talk to people, people also take that as a green light to do nothing. And so as much as this is work that takes time, that is ongoing, that you never quite perfect, there's also some shit you can do right away, right? Like if you have hiring power in an organization, you can hire more non-white folks. Like you can do that tomorrow. And this idea of like, they're just so hard to find or what, nah, right? And so I think you have to hold both of those truths, that this is long work, but that there are also some concrete things you could do tomorrow. Because the reality is, like taking that example of hiring, when folks wanna do an opportunity hire for a white dude, they find him real quick. And they figure out a way to do it. When we want to have responsive actions to a pandemic, we find the money and we do it real quick. And so all of these things about being unable to do it just aren't true. And I think the last piece, I agree with what Destiny said. I think too often people like to intellectualize this work because then they don't have to feel it. Because when you feel it, it's like, whoa, right? And for folks who live every day in Black bodies, we know that weight. We know the heaviness of bobbing and weaving and going from one setting to the next. And we don't have a choice to just turn it off. But for folks who want to turn it off, they want to intellectualize it. I think one of the ways of intellectualizing it is talking about unconscious bias. Well, if it's unconscious and everybody has it, I guess I don't have to do anything. I think another way to intellectualize it is by talking about history. And I think it's important to talk about history. I think there are still too many people who don't know about history. There are still too many schools that are not teaching about redlining, that are not truly teaching about how the civil rights movement started with a bus boycott, and it wasn't just Rosa Parks, right? And so I don't want people to not do that. I just want people to not be lazy about that. There's a whole free internet. The New York Times bestseller list now is all the books, right? Like, it's easy to find resources, but I think too often when folks stop there with like, oh, well, now I know my history and now I can move forward, they're not acknowledging the ways that every day our profession continues to, you know, hold people hostage, like police movement, enslave folks, like in our own movements. And so I think we both have to learn history, but not over intellectualize it so that we can't take ownership of the things we're doing today to continue to perpetuate some of the things that we say are just like distant history.
Yeah, thank you. Amina, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. I want to jump off that that fact that we do have to make people feel these things. And I do think that I agree completely with what both Tamika and Dr. Destiny have said here. And I see history more as a tool, you know, used rightly as being something that could make people feel exactly what the impacts have been over time, and that you know, history isn't stagnant, like it's constantly happening, and these things haven't ended. So I'll make this connection. In our tiny spatial worlds, we often believe that those things that are hyper local are just hyper local, when in reality, for the most part, it's actually hyper global. And so, for example, while on the surface, a lot of the different places that we look at, South Africa, Canada, America, appear to be very different, they are much more connected and similar than many of us would initially think they are. For example, South Africa's system of the day was apartheid. It was literally the Afrikaans Dutch word that the white settlers used, which meant aparthoods. It was segregation. This system, along with primarily the South African Bantustan Act, which was the act that literally segregated into reserves the indigenous Black people, was taught to the colonial Dutch Africans by Canada. Canada taught South Africa how to relegate, segregate, separate its indigenous Black population. The act that it taught the South Africans was developed under the Indian Act, which aimed to, quote, kill the Indian in the child. It controlled indigenous people's lands, resources, segregated them on reserves. And this is very much related to what happened in the United States through laws that we know as Jim Crow. And so what we think is hyper local is hyper global. And we are seeing these things manifest. And we have seen it in Canada, where people speak about urban renewal as if it's something that the borders stopped. The borders did not stop it. You know, I'm on the board of Hogan's Alley, a predominantly Black community that settled here. Many of them came from the United States, you know, seeking freedom and seeking exactly what it was that they deserved to be seeking out here. And then we're continually displaced again by a highway or an unfinished highway. And so, you know, it's very much a fight that we have right now here in Vancouver, where we are seeking redress. We're looking to have a community land trust. So yeah, these things that are hyper local are not, they're hyper global. And we need to start connecting these pieces. We need to start unraveling the history. And I think it's about the lens. I don't appreciate the European lens on this history. And I think it's about time that this history is unpacked from the lens of those who've had to deal with its impacts and still have to.
Yeah, well said, thank you. So now I want to focus on you guys all a bit and your specialities. You all, in preparing for this event, my co-organizers and I are all big fans. Toby Ochilana, who you interacted with tremendously via email, is a big fan. I'm a big fan, and you guys have done some incredible work through your careers. I kind of am curious about, you know, your journeys in and around planning that have led you guys to be able to advocate and use these platforms to promote like anti-racism and new methods of planning that are inherently protective of Black people and Black lives. So in what ways have you witnessed or experienced inequities in like some of your specializations and some of these you know, spaces that you occupy and promote, you know, this mission through that may not be apparent to people on the outside? I think in Columbus in particular, I've seen a lot of just unawareness of planning and unawareness of planning efforts. Development just happens, a bike lane goes up, a bike lane gets taken away, and not maybe the cohesion among our planning and decision makers and the community advocates that would perhaps be ideal. So can you guys speak to any experiences like that? I see Tamika nodding your head. Maybe you want to start this one off.
I did not want to start it off, but I will. I was just nodding because I totally hear what you're saying. Like, you know, I think I've said it before, but as a Black kid, I learned super early how I was supposed to act in public, right? And even to this day, I still have a mom that's like, white kids may do this, but for us, you already know, like, don't have me give you the look, right? And I'm like a grown-ass woman, but if my mom gives me the look still, like when we're in public, I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna be in trouble, right? Because from a very early age, we have learned that the way we move in space, the way we act in space, the way we look in space is going to determine many occasions if we live or die, right? And that is in our ancestors, that is in our elders, that is in our parents, that is in generations of folks who have been taught that you are Black, and from the moment that you are here, someone else is going to police how you can move and how you can act, right? And so I think I was raised by parents who have constantly been talking to me about liberation and freedom. A mother who's from, you know, who grew up in segregated South Carolina and knew what it was to be told you can't go here, you can't go there. My dad, who has 14 brothers and sisters and grew up in the projects and did what he had to do, you know, sold drugs, like hung out on the corner with his boys with his gun to protect himself, but knew how he could move and how he couldn't move in certain areas. And so for me, when you think about movement and when you think about how we as a people are either policed or not policed to move, I can't imagine why we're not doing more planning work. And part of it is that, like, a lot of folks just don't know about planning, right? Like, that's not, I think we've done like a better job in STEM of saying like, we got to get more girls and folks of color in STEM. And like, there needs to be the same kind of full court press where like philanthropists are throwing money at it and people are talking about it, because the folks who are making decisions about the cities and the communities, rural or urban, that we're building and who gets a say in that, it's a laughing matter, right? And we all know that. All of us who are in this field, who are folks of color, we know what it's like to be in that room and look around and be like, this is a shit show. Like these folks don't know, right? And why is it that we've been kept out of these positions? Because folks don't really want us like using our full potential. Because if there is any group of folks who really know what it is to be creative, to imagine a world for yourself that might not have been there before, that others have said is not possible, that's Black folks, that's folks of color, right? Like we can do that work. And folks are just so afraid to give us that power and being able to see. And so too often plans happen to us, bike lanes happen to us, developments happen to us instead of with us, are truly for us. And so I think, you know, my path was just being an executive director at a bike coalition, a job I took because I had been at a foundation where I had experienced racism. And I was like, yo, I just need something light. Let me just pass out some bike lights. Let me just protect myself, because white supremacy makes you feel crazy. And when you are in institutions where they are white led and people try to convince you that you're not worth shit, you start to believe it and you start to question yourself. And so I was like, let me just pass out some bike lights. And I was so lucky and so honored to work with the folks at the Bike Coalition. And I think that just opened my eyes to urban planning and built environment and transportation, and how all of these things are core to social justice, to civil rights, to fighting against anti-Blackness. And I've been really happy to be successful in this field. But there are still folks who are like, but you're not really a planner, but you're not really an engineer, you didn't go to grad school, and who are trying to hold the keys and hold things so tight and so secure because they see this next generation of us coming up, and they realize that that grip they have on the power is loosening, and that scares them. And they can either open up the door and invite us right in, or they can continue to try to close it with their gatekeeping. But that grip is going to come off either way. And I think there are more and more folks like us who are finding our communities, who are using United Voices, and who are really pushing this industry. And I don't say profession because there's so many different professions in this industry, but are really pushing this industry to be different. And we're pushing it to be different because we're making it different. We're not waiting for permission.
Absolutely agree. If I can, yeah, absolutely agree. And I think, you know, I just shared about how hyperglobal, zoning and segregation as a concept has been. And the question that I pose back is, if the primary tool that has been used to segregate and separate people is the means that's used, then do you really want to hire the people that you've been segregating and separating for so many years? You're not going to do that. You're not going to hire those folks, right? And that is the legacy of racism in urban planning. For example, in South Africa, right? Again, the oldest planner that's worked there with the highest level of years is under 10 years. Because could they hire the people that they were segregating? And I bring that back here, you know, to Canada, where we can almost count on both hands the number of practicing practitioners that we have, right? That are actually hired into municipalities. In Metro Vancouver, for example, 100% of the heads of planning departments are white. This is a very diverse region with 21 cities across it. 100% are white. So again, if the primary tool that you've been using in your planning and your development, these land use tools, were very much informed by segregation, be it economic and specifically racial, and continue to uphold that, then are you really trying to hire people that look like Destiny, look like me, look like Tamika, speak like us, you know, are really trying to build equity into the process? You're not. And that's the first front. It sounds really basic, but it's true. And it's true across multiple cities. And that's the uphill battle right there. Yeah.
I would only add that I have not had the benefit of having a rearing or lifestyle that I would characterize as being like joy filled, right? I'm still searching for, I don't know really what I am if I'm happy. You know, I'm not sure that I'm familiar with myself in ways that are beyond the trauma that I've experienced. And when I do an assessment of the types of trauma that have turned me into this person, all of that has happened or been visited upon me through, you know, my exposure and my vulnerability in the built environment. I know what it is to be pressed against concrete for an hour after being pulled out of a car. I used to wear a one against the grain fade. I know what it is to be homeless and to live in a car and to be treated like a criminal by virtue of not having money. I just told someone for the first time in a long time the story about my very first planning job. My coworker, a white man, approaching me at my cubicle, snatching the hijab off of my head and strangling me in the middle of the floor in front of colleagues that didn't intervene. I spent all of last year processing those traumas and responding to present day racism in the workspace with those past traumas in mind, and really confused and torn about how to respond and react to what I was dealing with. And so I think it's important when we have these conversations about the legacy of racism for us to really understand that those of us who are in these roles and who do make it into the room, it's taking a toll on us. It's dangerous, it's scary, it's exhausting. You still are broke at the end of the day, unless you're willing to compromise your values and switch code in ways that the three of us haven't been willing or able to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I just wanted to say, I think that's been one of the hardest parts in this work, that when there are folks like us who refuse to compromise who we are, for different reasons. It can be because we're, you know, recovering from trauma, and so really living into our authentic self. It could be because we're comfortable with ourselves and we're cool with who we are. It could be because we're tired. like it's just too much work to put up the front anymore for other people's comfort. But when you have folks who are in this space and who refuse to compromise their values and who will speak truth, you get everybody being like, oh my God, you're so amazing. You speak so much truth to power. Oh, it's so great, blah, 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 blah. But you don't know how hard it is for us to keep a job, right? And not because we're not talented, but because we stand in our power and because we own that power. And, you know, I was talking to one of our homies just about how there are more and more folks coming out of the woodwork being like, I do equity, I do equity, I do equity. And a lot of them are folks of color. And they are folks who are willing to tap dance and do whatever they need to do to get certain jobs. And that's hurting all of us, right? And so we see these organizations and we see these initiatives where it's like, well, we've made diversity a priority. We've hired this person, but I saw on Twitter somebody who was in a different industry than us, but she was just tweeting. She's like, yo, when y'all pick that person of color to run your stuff that none of us other person of color mess with, like, we already know what you're doing. You are determining, you are exhibiting what is appropriate and what is valid and whose Blackness you will accept. And even though you say you're doing diversity or you're doing equity, you're also just further trying to put those of us who have been in this work for a moment in our place. You're trying to make sure we know that if we want the keys to these certain levels of power and position, we have to know how to act. And so I do think, you know, I think Destiny's right. There are so many folks entering the space, and I'm happy for that, because everyone should base the things we talk about and all of their work. But I also think there are a lot of folks who haven't been in it as long as us, who haven't gone to the bathroom to cry at work, that haven't gone home and been like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of bed, that haven't said, I gotta say this because this isn't right. And I don't know if I'm going to have a job later. And then I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my rent. And then I don't know where I'm going to live, right? But I'm still going to do what's right. And so I think when people think about what can they do to be supportive, or what can they do to be an ally, I think that what is so interesting to me is folks have those flashes of bravery where they're like, I'm going to speak up. I'm going to say something. I'm going to do something. And then as soon as it gets hard, as soon as they get a little bit of pushback, it's like, well, where's the woman of color I can sacrifice? like, how can I make someone else do this? Are there a lot of allies that will pump you up behind the scenes and be like, I totally support you. I just want you, like, and I was talking to so-and-so and I told them they had to talk to you and blah, 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 blah. But you're still putting us out there as your shield. You're still using us as the fall guy when things go poorly. And so I think for folks who really want to be allies in this space, like, first you got to learn the difference between an ally and accomplice. Like, we're not just looking for allies who want to help us out. We're looking for folks who are ready to lose something. Because each and every time one of us speaks up or is on a panel or writes something or puts our name out there, like, we are willing to risk something, and we are risking something, and we have lost. And so if you're not at that level, then yes, keep reading your books, keep, shooting us the supportive stuff, donate money, do the things you have to do, but realize that there's something inherently different, to Destiny's point. There's something heavier, there's something harder about living it each and every day and doing what's right.
I'd just like to echo that real quick, and just say, we're not safe in these streets and we're not safe in these boardrooms. And there are two examples, multiple examples that you've just been provided there, but we're also not read as planners and as practitioners because of the color of our skins. There was an incident with Kenya Wheeler, an Oakland planner, who had worked on a project on a development and was admiring it, was admiring his work, which he has every single right in this world to do, and was accosted and had a weapon pulled on him because he didn't fit the bill of what an urbanist would look like, what somebody that would stare up at a building and admire it, or somebody that would look at a bike rack that they approved and say, this is really great, I like the colors, I like the location, I like, this is wonderful. But we're not read as planners. So even when we are in these spaces, we're not safe. And then when we're sent out by these predominantly white planning department directors to go do site visits or go do whatever it is that we're sent out there to do, the fact that I would have to let somebody know that I don't feel safe going out on a site visit on my own, that I even need to have that discussion. These were things that happened early days in my career, where I'd be sent to predominantly white neighborhoods to deal with what it was that I was made to deal with. And I don't feel comfortable walking along predominantly white single family neighborhoods. I don't care if I have the title of planner, it's not safe for me. And the fact that folks keep getting hired that don't even have that capacity, don't have that ability to understand that, and it's not required of them. We need to update our job descriptions, our job requirements at this point, because it's not just about saying hire more people that look like Destiny, myself, and Tamika. It's what capacity do they actually bring to understand the risks that we take every day in these streets and in these boardrooms. So yeah.
Do you feel like, Tamika and Amina, do you feel like, I've been wrestling a lot lately, especially now being in my own space and being able to have more creative control over my work plan. We really miss out on the opportunity, having an opportunity to be like who we're here to be. Like, I sometimes daydream about what the street in front of my apartment building would look like if I had access to that planning process. Like, I know it would be so bomb. It's just gray. It is bland, and it is much like what you would get at like an American restaurant, like seasonless. And I just feel like, in addition to the harm, the trauma, the discrimination, and us being relegated to helping other people have a change of heart and mind about our humanity, this field is getting the short end of the stick that is including us. Like you're not even getting what I actually innately could offer this space, which would completely make this field a much better, you know, place and more effective sector for everyone.
Yeah. So to speak to that, you know, there is so much pain in the lived experience of Black neighborhoods in North America that have been neglected. And neglected is a very gentle word to use. It is strategic. Neighborhoods have been abandoned and separated and isolated and strategically neglected and disenfranchised. And, you know, Tamika and Destiny, you guys speaking on the lived experience of, you know, harsh realities and the lived truth that you have to bring to the table, and the trauma that you're forced to relive when you are, you know, working on these planning efforts to ensure that those painful things don't happen to future generations of Black boys and girls and children. So when we are sort of envisioning a future where, let me work on this. What does it look like for your planning process to center Black joy? And I think that's my question. What does it look like in your planning process for you to center Black joy?
I mean, I'll try to start. Part of why I hesitate is because I a little bit feel like Destiny, like, yo, there's been so much trauma that sometimes it's hard, you know. Look, therapy is important. Like, first of all, centering Black joy in a planning process means if you can afford it, you have a support network of friends who you can talk to, and you have professional help, because this is really, really hard. And I think oftentimes therapists will say big questions to you, like, tell me about a time when you were really happy. And I think so often for Black folks, but all women of color, and frankly, folks who have been oppressed, whether it's queer folks, folks with disabilities, Indigenous folks, like, I think often the first thing that comes to mind is a time where we please someone else, a time where we were allowed a little bit of joy because we didn't make someone else too uncomfortable, right? And so I think Destiny's absolutely right. Understanding that joy and how to find that joy is so important, because the only stories of Black folks are not stories of despair and sorrow. The only stories of Indigenous folks whose stolen land we are all on is not of rape and pillage, right? The only stories of folks with disabilities is not, oh, aren't they so brave and courageous, or, oh, don't I feel sad for them, right? Like, we try to make folks who are different two-dimensional. And I think planning that centers on joy for those of us who have many reasons to not feel joy would be allowing us to be full characters. And that's whether or not I'm talking about a planning process or a character on TV, right? We always know that we are just like characters on the TV. We don't get much of a storyline. We don't have much depth. People like to box us in to serve a purpose to someone else, to be the cool friend, to be the funny friend, to be the temptress, right? Like, we can only do certain things. And I think that same thing happens in the planning process. So I think, even going back to Destiny's question, I've left hella jobs where folks are like, you did such a good job. And it's like, yo, but you didn't even get a half of it. You don't even know how talented I am, because you didn't allow me to be my full self. And I think when people ask me why I've started my own practice and what does it look like, right? Everyone says that in a very professional way. What is your practice going to look like? And I say, it looks like me being my authentic self. It looks like me being my full, whole self. And that is different than in other professional settings. It looks like me actually getting paid for my worth and being able to say no to people. It looks like me not having to always think about making other people uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean that I'm not professional. which is a trope. It doesn't mean that I'm always angry. It doesn't mean that I'm always this or that. It just means that I can be my full self. And I think that even when we are non-folks of color, or folks that aren't in oppressed groups, if you're planning for a community, you should want to consider their joy too. You should want to know all the ways they want to use that street, not just the ways that fit in to your perfect width bike lane. Like if they think, you know, our homie Brittany in Oakland, if they think that bike lane needs to be bigger and in the middle of the street, put it in the middle of the street, because that brings them their ultimate joy and allows them to be their full selves. And so I would constantly be asking that question.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it real. I don't know what it looks like to have joy in this field as a practitioner working within a very white supremacist scope lens system. I think I know the only time that I've seen what it might look like is when Black folks leave and start their own thing. And that's really unfortunate because this field has not changed in over 100 years and is going to suffer greatly for it. Listen, America was only able to put a white man on the moon because several Black women were there to make the calculations that were required to be made. And I'm just gonna say that 100. You need that full scope of diversity. You need those folks who are the most resourceful, that have had to live under systems and make multiple beautiful things out of it despite the odds. And so, yeah, this question of joy, I find it most often when I leave the office space. Yeah, that's real talk if you're asking me. I don't think planning I know for a fact it was never developed to assure that people, again, that look like me felt joy in the built environment. If anything, you know, every single element of it is very much has racism built into it and white supremacy built into it. You know, the father of modernism and modern architecture, I think his name is Adolphe Loos, and I learned this recently from another panel that was on by an indigenous planner, and the book is called Ornament and Crime. And in Ornament and Crime, he speaks to the fact that ornamentation ornamentation is a crime, right? So the things that we find, my shirt, its boldness, its vibrancy, my culture, you know, anything that isn't very sterile and sanitized is a crime. And so if that's how the father of modernism, you know, of architecture, that was his worldview, then all those who are being taught afterwards, that's their worldview. And so when it's an uphill battle to try to get people to understand that our urban design guidelines are sterile and are very much dictated by a white supremacist lens, you know, that's not a fun battle. That's not exciting, especially when you look around and you know that the environments that you work in are very much ensuring that there isn't the full diversity of people that could be there at that table. And so then you don't have the support. You're not turning to your left or your right and seeing another Black person, another indigenous person, another racialized person that you can then communicate with afterwards about, you know, how do we reach this point where we could get this done. So I don't know. I know that the field is appearing like very much has a facade right now. When we're talking about character and facades and all those things, there's a big facade going on right now with the field acting like it's ready for this, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it in the decision making. I'm not seeing it when elected officials, for example, start talking about, oh, we need to update our equity, diversity, and inclusion policy that we're going to put this, you know, request for proposals for and add anti-racism. They don't even understand why they're doing that. Or they put forward a motion to ask staff out here to look into, you know, how we can develop more equity within all segments of our city and our departments, but they don't look at the staff that they're asking to do this. They're not like, is our staff really able? Like, who is our staff? You know, you're outsourcing this work to the least equitable departments in most cases. So yeah, this, you know, there's a real facade going on, and I'm still watching, I'm still looking, and I'm still hoping, but the joy question is up in the air for me in this field.
So for me, for us, this question is actually a Thrivance exercise. This is actually something that we include when we investigate or do an analysis of communities. We ask people to just try, you know, to imagine what this space would be if it centered your joy. And so I put myself through that exercise sometimes, and I think about, well, what comes to mind for me usually are the things that kind of were in my environment when I was growing up that were there de facto, right? Because of all of the things that the city was unwilling to give us. We were really a really creative community. And so I think about the responses my senses used to have. Like, I would walk home from school and I could smell like folks outside cooking, and I will never forget that smell. And I would be entering into this zone where all of a sudden you're allowed to like cackle, full belly cackling, you know, and be loud, and like that stuff that you're not allowed to do in school though. And I think about, I remember when the city of Oakland outlawed whistle pipes on cars, and how I like yearned for the sound of whistle pipes on weekends, because that was how I knew, like it felt safer to go outside if there was like a big crowd outside. So that was one of the things that would wake me up on Saturdays, and like I would just be excited to get dressed up and go out there. I think about like this generation of beautiful young Black folks who created meme culture and Snapchat culture and TikTok culture, and like what those ideas and activities would feel like if we could be that and do that openly in the built environment, if those things were on our buildings, if those things were like a part of not the technology itself, but the creativity that helped them monetize those things, if that were a part of the planning process, what our cities and communities would look like. And so I think it's just, if we can stop this denial or of the senses, or like this effort to normalize what senses are, right? Like what sensibility is, that would be a good point of juncture. Yeah, a lot of folks are asking what we could do in the office and what white people could do. And I think Tamika already answered that, so I'm not going to go into that in depth, but I would say that if you are someone who is sitting around with the what to do now question, or what should I do, or how do we create that, it's a good sign that you probably aren't the best person to be in that position.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys for these candid answers. I mean, especially to this question about joy. It really is a challenge, and it's been coming up a lot in my spheres in Columbus as we're discussing. You know, we have a lot of incredible grassroots movements that are moving to take action to protect Black lives, Black queer lives, in our school systems, petitioning to city council. Everywhere, everything is happening. But I kind of want to focus in and discuss a little bit more, you know, like when we're in the office, when we're in the boardroom, when we're in these professional spaces, something that you brought up a little bit this afternoon, is like not being able to bring your full authentic self to the table, and thereby, you know, disservicing you in your personal growth, and a disadvantage to your community because you're not being tapped into your fullest. I think I want to talk about intersectionality a little bit right now as part of this conversation. For those that are participating that aren't familiar, intersectionality is just sort of a framework, a theory for thinking that acknowledges the really complex interactions between different facets of our social identities and different facets of label, whether that be race, gender, sexual identity. So something that you guys have spoken on, being, the Black woman in the boardroom and having to bring those identities. In my experience, it's like I'm a person of color, I'm a queer person, I'm a woman. And for me, I usually have to bring one of those at a time. And I think you guys, you might understand strongly, it's like you have to be the spokesperson for your race, the spokesperson for all Black women, the person that, comes in and brings like all of this narrative to the table, but neglecting so much of your own and able to push this mission forward. So when we're talking about, making space for intersectionality for people, for Black women planners, for Black planners, for people that are minority groups coming into planning that are trying to make these long-lasting changes, how do we begin to make space for that, for people to bring their fullest selves? How do we start dismantling this system from the inside out, if that's a bold ask? Anyone?
I'm stuck on this one. I don't know. Even and intersectionality is a theory that I'm really grounded in and was a huge part of my practice and study as an academic, and so I'm familiar with the term and its uses. I just don't know that there is a desire on my part to see sort of a transformation happen in the professional spaces. I'm very much an abolitionist of all things racist. And so I am not necessarily as interested in waiting to see like our white colleagues, as well-meaning as many of them are, have a change of heart, or even those who have the heart but don't have the know-how. It just is taking too long and too many lives for me to invest my thoughts and creativities in this space where we're unpacking how to be more inclusive or consider the intersectional identity of a person. To that end, though, I will say that when I think of myself as someone living, or how intersectionality shows up on me, I tend to label myself an around the way girl, and I feel like that characterization and that experience is a bit different from other Black women, even, right? Like it's I'm the one that gets followed for sure in the store, and I'm the one who folks listen in closely and intently for me to use incorrect grammar, right, to prove their assumptions correct. I'm the one who you should double check your the diploma to make sure I didn't forge it and turn it in. I am the image of the Black girl from the hood that should not be here, which is different from the immigrant Black women who have definitely their own set of challenges in professional spaces, but still get the benefit of being exotified by their colleagues, and at least there's some faith in their intellect. I don't always present as queer, and so I don't check that equity box usually, and so on and so forth. I'm not super dark. I'm not super light. I kind of have, I got the 4C curl pattern. I'm an African American descendant of slavery. I represent the body that was stolen and dehumanized first and the most. And so I think that when I think about intersectionality, and whether or not it's worthwhile to attempt to integrate workspaces, I'm not sure that that's the approach. I like this brick by brick approach, right, where we eventually topple the building.
Yeah, thank you.
I think for me, I saw the question about, are we going to talk about intersectionality? And it just made me pause, because a part of me was like, we have been. And part of that is because if Black folks can get free, like, we all gonna get free, because that's just who we are. but also because I've heard the other panelists explicitly talk about intersections of how this stuff might show up for other people. But I also think that sometimes we have to get comfortable with the fact that folks who can only speak to their experience can't be asked to speak to other people's experience. And that's different than standing in solidarity with those folks, which I think we do. And that's different from being willing to be called out by those folks, right? Like sometimes you need folks to be like, yo, are there closed captions? Sometimes you need folks to be like, yo, no one mentioned this. And I think we can all grow. But I also know that I'm on so few panels of all Black folks that I just might want to talk about Black folks, right? But I think the other thing that's interesting about intersectionality is sometimes people make assumptions that when people are talking about their lived experiences, they're not talking about intersectionality, and that erases parts of people, right? And so yeah, like I think feeling erasure in the Midwest is super common, and I know many folks in Ohio feel this way. I feel this way from Nebraska. There is a belief about what it means in some parts of this country to be Black, and just because you might come from the Midwest, folks don't realize that like it's hot in these streets in the Midwest. Folks don't realize that just because it doesn't have the same in our history books like segregation as the South, that we still have that right now in the Midwest, right? There's a reason Ferguson happened. There's a reason that whenever folks try to talk about segregation in school districts or this or that, there's always Midwestern places they go to, whether or not it's in Wisconsin, Ohio, Nebraska, whatever it may be. It's also true that Malcolm X was born in Omaha, right? And that we have these rich histories of Black folks. And so sometimes I think folks see Black folks talking, and in particular Black women, and they want us to carry it all. And there is an assumption that we aren't carrying it at all. There is an assumption that we're not trying to bring other people with us. But for me, I think intersectionality is important. And the example I always give is that when I was an employment lawyer, and I was a civil rights employment lawyer, if I had a white gay man come in and say I was discriminated against at work, and as his lawyer, I said, why? He said, because I'm gay. No hesitation, right? But when we would talk to our clients who were undocumented, didn't speak English, queer, survivors of sexual assault, like all of these different things, and you're like, yo, why were you discriminated against at work? It's like, ooh, it could be a lot of things, right? And her consciousness and her awareness of that is just always there. And so as someone who identifies as gender nonconforming, you know, under the big umbrella of trans, someone who strongly identifies as Black, strongly identifies as a Black woman, because I was raised by Black women, so that's a really important identity to me. Someone who identifies over all of these multiple intersections and has been lucky enough to be smart and to get into good schools, to get a good education. When I see someone crossing the street when they see me coming, or holding their purse a little tighter when I walk by them in the store, in that instant, I am thinking about if it's because I'm Black, if it's because I am genderqueer and I'm making them nervous and they think I'm checking them out. Is it because they think I'm actually a young Black man? Is it because this, like in that moment, I'm able to process all of those things, and I am conscious of how all of my identities are showing up. And every single day, I know when I'm going to wear a tie. I know when I'm not going to wear a tie. I know when I'm going to wear pink because it might soften it a little bit, and when I'm not, right? Like I'm thinking about all of these things. And so I always say to folks who want to care about intersectionality, some folks aren't at multiple identities. And when you don't acknowledge that there are people who are at those multiple identities, you erase us. You just erase us. And that erasure is damaging and is harmful and carries a lot. But secondly, for those of us who do live at the intersections, we are always thinking about these things. And so when I go to a community, when I go to a street, I'm thinking about how I would experience it as a woman, how I would experience it as a young Black man, how I would experience it as someone who was trans, how would I experience it as a Black person just in a hoodie, right? Like I'm thinking about all of these things. And for folks who have the privilege where they don't constantly having to be doing these intersections, for them to say that they should just get a pass, Like, how do you force yourself to think about it? And so I think that's another thing when you're an ally who wants to help, or when you want to understand intersectionality, how do you force yourself to think about these things that so many of us just have to? How do you make yourself do something that you don't have to do? And that's like really checking your privilege. And that is really hard for folks because it feels difficult and overwhelming. And it's like, no shit, do it anyway.
Yeah, I think for me, it's important to remind us where even intersectionality comes from, and that it's steeped in obviously Black thought, African-American Black thought specifically, and Black thought from women. And so it's especially where, power and oppression and subjugation come and collide. And I think in this discussion, we need to speak about how terms are co-opted and how terms are taken outside of the realm of where they came from. And that's a very important part. And what I see too often sometimes in discussions of intersectionality is that Black women and Black trans folks still get left behind in that conversation. And that's a big, 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 big uncomfortable reality. And it's the same thing that I'm seeing with anti-racism. Well, let's make everything anti-racist. Well, sure, but if we're not careful, it's going to be the exact same problem where it's co-opted and Black people are left behind. And it's about focusing on anti-Black racism. But I completely echo everything that Tamika and Destiny said here. Is this entire conversation has been about intersectionality. So even having a question about, I don't know if this came from the audience or I don't know, but we're constantly modeling every one of these theories that we're speaking about. And so I put it back on those asking the question is, why don't you see it? Why don't you still see it? Like, why are you still unable to see in this discussion, me bringing up, that things are hyperlocal, that are actually global, and speaking about apartheid versus the Indian Act versus Jim Crow. These are also intersectional discussions. When Tamika's bringing up migrant workers, when Destiny's referring to Muslims, in Vancouver, Black people make up 1% is what they say of the population. We make 6% of the unhoused population. A lot of those who make that population within the Black community are also of the Black refugee community, who are immediately funneled into homelessness. Immediately. It doesn't even take a few months because we just don't have the housing. And they don't have the supports. In Canada, because it's a very big part for me, it's very important for me to let Americans know about what happens in Canada and to rid Americans of the Canadian exceptionalism that, if you just cross the border, then you're free of, what's happening in the United States. This is why it's important for me to bring up Hogan's Alley and what happened here. Why it's important to bring up where I grew up in the city of Toronto, the most segregated city in Canada, that has branded itself on Black culture. Like everybody knows Toronto, Drake, etc. Branded itself on Black culture, on a Black sports team, on Blackness in all its forms. And it's the most segregated economically and racially. Recently came out, and growing up, I saw this, recently came out in articles, and people are just kind of, putting it all together, that your proximity to other Black people in the city of Toronto, your ability to stay connected socially, economically with other Black people in Toronto is a hindrance to economic mobility. Your ability to stay connected as a Black Muslim, primarily, to other Muslims is a hindrance to your economic mobility. There was a Black woman who was stripped of her job because her security clearance was deemed, she didn't pass security clearance because her father had used her car to go to a funeral that other people had been at that apparently engaged in illegal activities. They were all Black Muslims. So she lost her job There are Black people losing their homes because they have children who are connected to somebody that might have a criminal record, or that they had a criminal record. What does it matter? That's your home. And so that's a very real discussion that I don't think people in Toronto are even having. So all of this has to do with intersectionality. We're modeling it, we're discussing it. And yeah, it compounds. It compounds the more that you have to deal with, the more that you have to think about. Is it because my name is Islamic that this is happening? Is it because of my skin? Is it because I'm a woman? You know, is it because in Vancouver, you know, I speak with a funny accent that's from Toronto? You know, is it because I have moments where I can't and refuse to hide who I am? What are these reasons? And I also feel that we've gotten to a point where the storytelling, I'm tired of it. I'm really tired of it. I'm tired of having to tell you who I am. Like, you're not owed that. And I don't mean anybody specifically, but I mean like the field, you know, like, tell us your story, right? Like, it's done to us as much as it's done to the public. And I'm telling you, I'm tired of it. So the public is sure as hell tired of it, right? You don't own my story, right? I'm tired of this drive to have people relive their trauma over and over again. It's re-traumatizing. And that's not the future I want to go into. That's not the equity work I want to do, you know, where we're constantly re-traumatizing people and forcing them to have to relive these things for it to be proven. By who? A white lens? White practitioners? That's not it. That's not it for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, we're running into some time, so I already had transitioned us to some of the audience questions, and I dismissed a couple that we had already sort of gotten at. We're getting a couple more in right now. Let's see, at the top, I don't want to talk about that anymore. This is an interesting one, and I want to get onto some of these topics before we have to wrap up this evening. So have the panelists been involved with or monitored any of the smart city and smart mobility initiatives in North America and beyond? And if you have, this question asker is wondering if you can share your perspectives on how justice, equity, Blackness, racism in this sort of tech sphere of transportation planning is. So does anyone want to speak on some experience with that?
Yeah, I'll offer two examples that repulsed me. The first thing was I, you know, was blessed to be still working with the city of LA when micromobility started. And so I was privy to the process by which the tech companies were allowed to decide where they would deploy their new technology first. And sure enough, I think still the scooters and bike share companies were literally permitted to deploy bikes in a way that created a huge donut hole of broken connectivity to this new network, exactly where the Black and brown community is located in South Central LA. And I just thought, even with this glaring example of racism on a map, everyone is just acting like this is okay. The next thing that happened, or maybe simultaneously, was this infusion of posturing as though technology was going to advance us all. And so we had things like coding the curb, which was had so much irony because our curb, the curb outside of the building I worked in, was literally Skid Row. And so to think that we are willing to sit down at tables and negotiate with tech industry about how they want to use this space, well, we literally are stepping over dehydrated, hungry, unemployed people to get to the table is just, it's really disturbing to me. But then, you know, we have to think about not signing our communities up to be in this like third wave of digital divide by just saying no to technology. So I will say this, that what I'm seeing, I'm not happy about. I'm seeing these solutions that were supposed to be helping us stay connected and move around being used to surveil and monetize poverty. I'm seeing the data from these companies be sold and swap hands 4 or 5 times over. So to invent even more technology that won't even benefit the people who make up those numbers. So that's my take on smart cities.
So you asked about joy earlier, and I think one of the
They're
things
not smart.
I think one of the things I think of when I think of joy is when I ride my bike. When I'm on a scooter, like for as crazy as the bike coalition was, and for as much racism as I've encountered and you know, from folks who are cyclists, I love that job. I love the freedom I felt when I was on a bike. It took me back to being a kid when I got my first bike. I felt the same way the first time I got on a scooter. I was like, oh shit, this is fun, right? I think part of the trouble with Black joy is like it could end at any moment, right? Like the second you get stopped and someone's like, that's a nice bike, is that your bike? Like it shakes you. And so what I like about technology and what I like about some of the micromobility stuff that's happening is that in theory, when I was at the Bike Coalition and Bike Share deployed in LA, the idea was that everyone has access, right? And so you can get more people on bikes, on scooters who might not have personal access to just go buy one. I think part of the struggle we've had in transportation is that we're so siloed that a transportation planner shows up at a meeting, someone asks them a housing question, and they're like, yo, I'm just a transportation planner. And so I think that's been one of the problems with technology as tech has entered to transportation. You want to tell me that you're going to make these things available to more people, but you don't want to talk about how many people in this country are unbanked or why they're unbanked. You don't want to talk about economic justice issues that are barriers to everybody being able to fully enjoy this because you're just a transportation person. And so you can't tell me that technology is going to save me if you're not willing to have deeper conversations about how there are still going to be barriers to this thing that I can agree with you is good, but everybody can't use it. But you don't want to have that conversation. You just want me to get on the scooter and shut up, right? And so I think that's been the hard part. And then the other part is when you think about the transportation industry, which we've all talked about, and you look at leadership and you look who's in positions of power, it's all white people, like mostly white people, right? When you look at tech, it's the same thing. And so it is not surprising when someone tells me that data shows that autonomous vehicles are less likely to stop for dark-skinned people, right? Because who's in the room coding and putting together the technology saying, yo, dog, I almost got hit because that car didn't see me. Not anybody who looks like us, right? And I think the other thing that's really troubling to me, and I'll end here, is like, you know, Destiny talked about other moments of Black joy. Like Black folks make Twitter, TikTok, all of those things what they are, but we're not getting paid off of them. We're not at the startup that's about to do an IPO, getting shares. And so we're doing all of these things. And so for me, I am not a person, I agree with Destiny, I'm not trying to leave folks further behind by saying you have to like just disavow technology. I think technology presents many solutions for us. Of course, I love a faucet that I can just put my hands under and wash my hands, especially during COVID. I don't want to touch shit, but if the sensor can't detect Black skin, then how does it help me? Now I got to touch more shit than anybody. And I got to be the crazy person in the bathroom when everybody thinks I'm a man in the woman's bathroom, go into 3 different sinks, trying to get it to go, put my whole arm under, right? And so for me, I think technology brings about a ton of Black joy for Black folks. I just think we need, like, it's just this dangerous intersection of transportation, technology, whiteness that is really, like, who is it a smart city for?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when I think of some of the greatest technology, I think of mobile money transfers that came out of the continent of Africa from Kenya. That was Black people that invented that. So to ever try to connect Black people as being anti-technology, that is also not it. It's when, again, those who are behind the scenes developing the solutions for the entire world are still the same people who have essentially ensured that we all function under this system that is killing the planet, killing Black people on streets, keeping people unhoused, making transportation inequitable. The system is called white supremacy. And when we talk about smart cities, that when it's developed under the system, it's inherently going to be tied to mass surveillance, and it is. I don't, need to reiterate any of the examples that Tamika just gave you. That's all a discussion about algorithmic discrimination. Sorry, and these things can be easily fixed. We know how to fix them, but it just comes down to political will. It comes down to the ability of those who are in leadership roles to make the right decisions. And then that's a bigger discussion right there, whether or not you're ready to do exactly what Destiny mentioned, which is abolish a whole lot of things. And that's basically where we need to be at. Ignatieff, he's an author, and I've been reading him. So I'm going to recommend everybody read this book. It's How the Irish Became White. And I know we're not supposed to intellectualize this, but I really need people to start studying whiteness and the concept of whiteness and white supremacy. And I know this is it's taboo. I'm on a panel. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this. I'm saying it. And he says that he argues that tyranny to whiteness is loyalty to humanity. And whiteness is not, it's not benign. It is manufactured. It's a legal concept. It's been enshrined in laws under the Naturalization Act in the United States and similar acts in Canada. And that's where we're at. In any discussion around planning, when we're talking about planning is inherently anti-Black, planning is inherently racist, what we're saying is that a whole lot of things need to be abolished in order to not make it be those things. And that includes not incorporating a new brand for planning, which is smart cities. No.
Which is code, which is another form of code, literal code. And I think that someone asked the question, well, we have all these city bikes and what, nobody's using it. What's up with that? And it's coded to exclude us, even when it's in our communities. I'm not putting my debit card on my fixed income in a machine that takes a $45 deposit because I live in a neighborhood that's considered high risk for the bike being stolen. I'm not doing that. And then I'm not checking a box or signing my name on an app that says if I ride in the street, I can be fined or arrested. Or if I don't have a helmet on, that's grounds for me to be stopped and have my person searched. Definitely not, even in the best conditions with a parking protected bike lane, down to ride my bike through any path where we have cities who have unmarked vehicles with jump out boys and police hopping out and snatching people's children off of the bikes with the helmets on and arresting them and holding them at the police station for no cause whatsoever. It's literally coded. The language attached to the technology says everybody but Black people should use this. And we don't even trust you when you do.
Right. And I know we're almost out of time, but I'll just finish on this point. I got to do a project for LADOT post Destiny where we got to put a pause. We got to look at what had happened in the first year with scooters. And, the city had tried a policy, it was more carrot than stick of like, you can deploy more vehicles overall if you deploy in these neighborhoods. But I think something that Destiny said earlier is like, that's still waiting on people to like change their hearts and minds and just do the right thing. Like that hasn't that hasn't worked. Incentivizing folks to care about people of color only works when it benefits them. And if it doesn't benefit them, they don't see our humanity. And so what I really appreciated about that project is we got to say that. And we didn't just get to say it. We got to go to community members who said, why are you talking to me about scooters? I care about this. I care about this. I care about this. And what we actually put together for the department at the end of the day was a list of principles that they needed to look at if they were going to do any kind of work. And very little of them were like, and when it comes to technology, do this, because there's just so much mistrust about surveillance, about data, about tracking. And so I think we have to be willing to go into communities and say, we're here to talk about technology, or we're here to talk about this bike lane, but what's going on for you, and actually hear that and then be willing to do something about it. Because if we aren't listening to people, we're just trying to incentivize the folks who we already listen to, the folks who we are already in relationship to, the folks who look just like us. If we're just listening to them and we say, okay, but do the right thing, Bob. Like, how many times has Bob done the right thing by me? And so I'm just not going to trust that.
And also, those of you who are listening who represent these agencies, not just LADOT, but we see what you're doing, making it hard for Black women in those spaces, pushing them out, and then hiring people to produce the ideas that they left behind. We see you. We see you.
All right, and with that, let's end on one sort of call to action. We've discussed a lot of intense, heavy topics tonight. Thank you guys for your time and your energy toward this. To end, I want to make sure that we are empowering and equipping people to continue this conversation. So if you could plug one book, one site, one podcast, one resource for people to, put some energy and time towards, go ahead and plug one thing as we sort of come to a close here.
I'll plug myself. We actually yesterday did a soft launch for our Dignity Institute, which is a 8-week series or institute. It's hands-on, so we're actually mailing physical packages and tools and materials to participants, and you get 40-hour training that it has intersectionality in there for the intersectionality folks in the room. But you learn how to do dignity-infused community engagement planning and policy development. And you also will leave out of that space with a strategy for funding the work, as well as an opportunity to have one-on-one consultation with myself or another Thrivance Group staff person with expertise in your field.
I'll plug the Hogan's Alley Society, hogansalley.org. Please learn about it, dig into what happened. I can share some in-depth research about the community, understand deeply that urban renewal is very real in Canada as well, and it's ongoing, and that Black people have been made to be very unsettled and displaced in the city of Vancouver ever since then. And so, yeah, please do engage with that. I'm going to plug all the work of Thrivance and Dr. Destiny Thomas, all the writing that she's doing. I'm going to plug Tamika Butler, all her work, her new endeavors. Yeah.
I was going to do the same thing. Just plug my amazing co-panelists and also your organization for even putting on a panel with us. For folks who feel like, that was depressing, that was heavy. This work is hard. This work isn't always happy, but I think you still see us smiling, you still see us thriving. And so just know that, again, as folks, we are those who have stepped into our power, who have owned our power. So I think for the folks of color who are on here and you're looking for resources and you're struggling to figure out if you have a place, just know that there's a community, and know that the most dangerous thing you can do to these folks is to just trust yourself and to love yourself and to own your power. And if you ever feel like you need somebody to help remind you of that, know that there is this community of folks who would be more than happy to tell you that the work you're doing is important, the work you're doing is valued. And even if you're not in the boardroom yet, like I said, that grip is loosening, and you know, we need you to do what feels safe for you, but there are those of us who care and who will hold that space for you. I think for the white allies who want to do the work, you know, like Amina said, follow all of us. I just asked on Twitter, I think today or yesterday, a lot of folks were putting together lists of resources and things you can read. And so it's like right at the top of my timeline. And so I encourage folks to read those things. And when you are reading books like White Fragility and The Color of Law, remember that many of those books are written by really talented, amazing folks. And I think they are books that help white people see things, but question why it took a white person saying it or writing it for you to believe it. And seek out Black authors, seek out authors of color, seek out Indigenous folks who are writing about their own histories, not just these histories. And they don't have to be planners. There are talented people like Octavia Butler, Audre Lorde, who put things out that matter to all of us. And so just, you know, find your path, do this work, and stay committed to it.
Thank you for that. All right, and thank you all, our panelists again, Tamika, Destiny, Amina, for making space and time to share with us today. For everyone that's on the call, you can look forward to a follow-up email from Strong Women, Strong Places later this week that will have links to all of these educational and professional resources and ways to get involved with our organization. Again, our organization works to empower and educate placemakers to the needs of women, trans, and non-binary individuals so that they are empowered to experience safe, healthy, and equitable communities. We are a young organization, but we really want to do the work in our community. So, you know, please get involved, get in touch, follow our newsletter, our Facebook, our Instagram. We want to make more events like this available to you, and we just want your communication and your support, so tell us how we can help you. As you exit this session tonight, you will be automatically directed to a post survey that you can just share some feedback and also get involved. And on a final note, this event was made free to everyone to ensure access to a wider audience, as we hoped to benefit as many people as possible. In lieu of a ticket fee, we would ask that you donate $5 to a local organization that is doing the hard work in your community. If you would like to donate to a Columbus-based organization, I would suggest the Black, Queer, and Intersectional Collective, or BQIC. They can be found at bqic.net or BQIC on Facebook. They are an amazing grassroots community organization that works to liberate Black queer folks through direct action and community organizing. I'm heavily involved with them, and I just love what they're doing in Columbus. And that's going to do it for us tonight. Thank you again, everyone, for getting through this heavy but necessary conversation. And on behalf of Strong Women, Strong Places, I wish you all a good evening and health and safety out there. Everyone take care.